Welcome to your virtual event. Before we get started, we'll walk you through the features of our webinar platform so you have a seamless experience. This button allows you to turn the audio on and off. Please note, by default, the button will be toggled to mute, so you'll need to turn it on at the start of the session. If you'd like to proceed with closed captioning, click here. When it's time for Q&A, engage with speakers by typing your questions into this window. You may be asked to participate in a live poll during the discussion. Once the question is presented, you can share your thoughts by selecting the response that aligns with how you feel. When the session is over, click here to exit. At the end of the webinar, we would appreciate your feedback on how the session went.
Greetings. I would like to welcome everyone on our audience today. We are very grateful that you have chosen to share some of your busy day with us. We know your time is valuable, and we'll honor that today with what I am confident will be an engaging discussion. Once again, our topic today is Agents on Offense, Tackling FinCrime with Vertical GenAI Agents. Our sponsor today is NTT DATA. Our host is American Banker, and my name is Mike Sisk. I'm a contributing editor at American Banker, and I will be your moderator today. And I am very pleased to introduce our four speakers with us today. We have with us Ipshita Ray. She is an executive director at Financial Crime Sanctions Screening at UBS. We also have Ronak Doshi. He is a partner at Everest Group, leading digital transformation and applications. Aaron Elston, it leads the financial crime team for the risk and compliance industry practice. And finally, we have Nick Dalbus. He is a managing director within NTT DATA's data and AI practice, specializing in banking and financial services clients. And very delighted to have all four panelists with us today. I think it's going to be a great discussion. We're going to have just sort of a kind of a roundtable discussion with our four experts here today. And I'm going to jump into that in just a second. Just one quick note: we are recording today's event, but we can still take questions. So what we'll do is, if you have a question, please put it into the queue throughout the hour that we have, the time we have with us today, and we'll follow up after the program with any question that you've got. So please, we very much want to hear from you. Ask away. All right, so let's get into it here. Aaron, first question to you. How have financial crime tactics evolved over the years, and why is generative AI considered essential in combating these threats?
So first of all, thank you for having me, Mike. Great event with American Banker and NTT DATA. Glad to be here. I think that's a great question, especially how generative AI has really taken off the last couple of years. And really, financial crimes have shifted from, historically straightforward methods like check fraud, some social engineering, basic hacking methods and phishing strategies and stuff that are pretty basic, but now getting really involving ransomware, more sophisticated money laundering methods, and then they're using generative AI to make more complex phishing schemes as well. On the other side, in terms of combating that, I think generative AI really offers really powerful capabilities, especially when you get into integrating agentic AI tools. We can automate data collection, link multiple analytics processes, and we can tie generative AI into more standard AI machine learning methods.
Fantastic. Thanks, Aaron. And I'd love to, Nick, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, no, thank you, Mike, and thank you to the rest of the panel. Excited to be here today, as Aaron mentioned. So yeah, just to add to that, those are great points, Aaron. Another piece that I'd mention is just honing in on the fact that over time, we've moved from traditional rules-based or machine learning-driven approaches within FinCrime to the generative AI approaches that we now are seeing today. So with that, obviously, the complexity of the schemes of agents are changing, right? So traditional methods, like Aaron mentioned, phishing, identity theft, some of that stuff has now moved over to more advanced and sophisticated methods of fraud, like synthetic identity fraud, cyber attacks, ransomware, stuff like that. In terms of comparison or combating these threats, right? I believe GenAI is essential in this because you're able to analyze vast data sets more quickly, identify those subtle patterns that might not have been identified with traditional rules-based, and adopt new tactics pretty quickly. And obviously, the key prerequisite here is you have to have the right architecture in place, the platforms, the data feeding this, and obviously, most importantly, the governance. But again, like Aaron mentioned, I think there's a lot of ways GenAI can combat fraud and threats these days.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Nick. Ifshit, I'd love to get your thoughts on this question. Loop you in here.
Yes, I just came off of mute. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for having me. Really, really appreciate it. I mean, I think, what Aaron and Nick said, obviously very much spot on. I think from a, financial institution perspective, I think it's also very important to ensure that, the criminals are all getting smarter. I mean, everybody is really, very much in tune with the new technology that's coming out, and obviously financial institutions all have to keep up to ensure that we have the right controls in place, the right infrastructure and framework in place, because criminals can just they can evade all sorts of controls, impersonate a client, with deep fake AI technology, and then completely, blindside, let's say, a financial advisor or somebody, and come in and say, well, this is what I want to do. And how, as like a bank, how do you ensure that you are able to make the right matches and ensure that you're not getting, I guess, duped by a criminal? I think all of that's very important because they are getting so sophisticated, and the things we see these days is kind of insane. So definitely moving away from the very traditional forms of money laundering and trying to hide identity. It's a different world today. So I think Gen AI can make a big difference in that area as well.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, let me ask Nick this next question. What are the key differences between vertical GenAI agents and traditional rule-based or machine learning-driven approaches in financial crime compliance?
Thanks, Mike, and that's a great question. So I think that to start off, the way you could fully explain this is kind of talking through the evolution of AI. And I think you can't just jump from traditional rules-based into agent-based approach, right? There's a couple steps in between. So what I would mention in terms of over the years regarding compliance and how it's evolved from simple rule-based monitoring today, I would start with, it obviously started with rule-based systems where traditional compliance models relied on static, manually defined rules to monitor transactions, right? While this was effective at the time, it helped with well-known financial crime patterns. These systems lacked adaptability. They generated excessive false positives and required some manual intervention. The next stage really came into play was machine learning-based approaches, right? So the introduction of ML-driven compliance enabled banks to move on beyond those like rigid rules-based sets, right? And machine learning models were able to analyze more transaction data, fraud patterns, reduced false positives, but again, they were still limited on predefined parameters such as like risk indicators or historical data, etc. And they were more kind of reactive rather than proactive. The next phase, obviously, we've seen over the past couple of years would be getting into Gen AI, right? And I'll get to agents in a second. But from Gen AI, we obviously emerged to see a lot of exponential efficiencies gained in terms of automating compliance documentation or the client lifecycle management, risk assessments, etc. And Gen AI models have been shown to be pretty effective and pretty accurate in doing some of those things, like generating SARs or helping AML investigators, stuff like that. But obviously, there's still within Gen AI models, you still have to have prompt tuning, and you're reliant on humans creating the right prompts and making sure the prompts match the personas and all that stuff. So there's still components where there's a lot of manual intensive process. So now we're obviously coming into the age of agentic AI, and now this is kind of getting back to the comparison of the question. So with agents, this is obviously the latest revolution, and this brings like another level of autonomy, and where you're able to not only build on the Gen AI piece of RAG-based models and LLMs, but these agents are able to perceive, reason, and act based on real-time data. They're able to retrieve from other data sources availability of that data, and in real time produce results or outputs to help the humans in the loop or the fraud experts or the compliance experts make those decisions pretty quickly. So again, that's kind of the evolution. To go back and kind of summarize the question, which was traditional rules-based systems versus the agent-based approach. I think the biggest difference here is those rules-based were predefined rules and logic sets that required extensive training data. Whereas these vertical agents now, they leverage LLMs and they're able to contextualize responses because they are verticalized and they're specific in a specific industry, which obviously here is FinCrime. So they offer obviously greater flexibility and adaptability in detecting and preventing financial crimes. So I'll pause there and turn it over to Aaron.
Yeah, I feel like you covered most of the things. I think the biggest thing that's happened is that, you know, when rules fail and tactics evolve, machine learning can still miss a lot of the anomalies it hasn't seen before, right? And so with the move to agentic AI, we're able to specialize in domains like financial crime, leverage contextual understanding, right, to uncover those nuanced patterns. So complex layer money laundering, we can leverage generative AI to generate smarter typologies, right, based on those to reduce our false positives, and that's a big game changer, right? And this is very new, right? As we build out these capabilities, because we have to rely on a lot of domain knowledge and train models, whether it's RAG or even new models, that has this key domain knowledge, right? I think also the leveraging an agentic AI approach, we talk about single agents, but also we can use different types of agents. We can further automate these capabilities, connect systems, orchestrate our tasks, and we can scale detection in a more dynamic manner, right, than older methods. So all these sort of tools, they're exciting, but you have to do it within a regulatory framework, and you have to do it in a way that that makes sense and operates within the control frameworks, which is sort of what Ipshita was, you know, I believe was referring to earlier.
Thank you, Aaron. Ronak, love to hear from you.
Yeah, no, again, happy to share my thoughts. And again, I agree with what, Nick and Aaron mentioned on this topic. I want to bring back a few specific differences in these approaches. Specifically, if you look at the traditional machine learning models that Nick mentioned, that if you're using it for isolated tasks, say, such as risk scoring, they tend to become black boxes, right? They have limited transparency. But what we've seen with generative AI is these agents can now start provide context, answer your questions, provide more explanation, create more human readable reports, and even evidence summaries, which makes it more user friendly and I would say transparent in nature. And these vertical generative AI agents are pre-trained on financial crime and compliance data, right? Be it suspicious activity reports, SARS, KYC, sanctions, regulatory typologies. So they are now trying to understand money laundering. They're trying to understand fraud patterns much better than what generic machine learning models would, because these machine learning models would require retraining cycles, or like a rule-based system would require manual rule updates, which you don't need in the generative AI piece, which Aaron mentioned. Right now, I could start building holistic compliance. Thinking of these earlier, machine learning models, which were for specific silos, like say AML and fraud. But what if I want to bring these together as a Framel model? Now I have vertical GenAI agents that they can talk to each other. They can understand what each of these activities are doing. They can even learn from the human performing the task and then start replicating it and learn from that behavior. We have seen certain proof of concepts where generative AI agents in financial services institutions are reporting almost a 60% reduction in false positives and 50% more fraud cases detected. So it's already starting to show result in terms of the speed and accuracy, because Ipshita mentioned, right, the rate at which the fraudsters and the ones who want to abuse the systems, I think they are kind of becoming much more active. They have more speed, and we also have digital transactions which are being almost real time. you need technology that can also behave at this real-time controls level, and that's where I think the differences come out very strongly for vertical GenAI agents.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Ronak. All right. Let me toss this next question to Nick. Can you provide examples of how generative AI has been successfully implemented in fraud detection, anti-money laundering, and client lifecycle management?
Thanks, Mike. Another great question. So yeah, I mean, I think both not just Gen AI, but also agents are particularly transformative in terms of supporting or augmenting AML and fraud prevention, especially where there's real-time risk analysis. So one example that I'd want to put kind of that's pretty relevant to me right now is within the AML investigation space. So we built out an agent-based tool where we can augment the customer onboarding and AML investigation process. And this GenAI agent tool plugs into a typical enterprise case management solution where it can then handle all the back-end data retrieval, the review and summarization processes that an investigator would typically have to do. So it's kind of expediting that part of the process and identifying the data from various sources, right? That's piece one. Then from an investigator's point of view, they can see this proactive or this dashboard view where they can go in and review their cases. They can leverage pre-created prompts that are based on their persona or their role, and then quickly obtain outputs of that review process. And once that's done, the agent, which is producing everything, then that investigator can go and drill into the source of the information to make sure they can verify and validate what was produced by the agent is correct. And all that stuff in the back end where we're talking about accuracy and governance and controls that's been mentioned earlier has to come into play when you're building something like this out. But in summary, I think from that example, from an AML investigation process, that those agents help streamline or automate the manual workflow piece of it, and then filter back in or plug back into whatever that enterprise case management tool is that the banks are using. Another example, which if we kind of touch on the client lifecycle management piece of from a customer onboarding perspective, again, there's a certain manual checklist that has to be followed by these onboarding analysts to make sure a high net worth or a high risk individual is certified and cleared through their processes before they onboard them. So again, similar process where vertical agents can go and retrieve that data and perform the CDD or the EDD checklist that an analyst would do. And then instead of the analyst doing it themselves, they're really just verifying and validating rather than doing it. So again, significant time savings, cost savings at a tangible level. Those are kind of a couple examples, but then the last piece I'd probably mention is just considerations when implementing something like this. Obviously, like you're dealing with very complex data, architecture, platforms and different systems that the banks are using, right? So you have to make sure you're building these agentic solutions with a modular approach in mind that allows for interoperability. So I'd mention that as one key thing. Another key thing is just the data itself. Obviously, you're relying on high quality data, but it doesn't have to be perfect when you're using these vertical agents. But making sure that you identify the correct data sources and you're going through a validation cycle or a review cycle to make sure the accuracy is good from a data lens. That's also important. And then the last piece, which I know we touched on in terms of governance and controls already, is obviously the data access and privacy concerns around this, because these agents are going to have access to specific data sources and data that needs to be classified, or there's different data sensitivity or cross-border data sharing. Whatever those rules are, you need to bake in the AI governance with this as you're building it out. So yeah, there's a lot of other examples, but I'll leave it with that in terms of the two that came to mind.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick. Ronak, share your thoughts, please.
Sure. Now, again, a couple of case studies quickly, right? So this is one of the UK-based bank, which set up a AI-based, dynamic risk assessment. This is built on top of Google technology. It is working across 40 million accounts. What's interesting is, yes, they are having a higher increase in detection of financial crime, lower false positives, all of that is good. It is saving a lot of time. So they said things that used to typically take investigations, which were weeks, are now days, and it's going to go further down. But the one benefit of this was a design principle is also reducing customer friction. So that was another thing is, hey, this is not just about compliance, but the experience of the customers and the operators on the financial crime and compliance side. So that was one which was good. The other one, I think, Nick, you mentioned, but we saw this very interesting thing around the AI and client lifecycle management. This is a US-based bank. What they've done is they're accelerating a lot of the suspicious activity reports, the SAR reports drafting. They're reducing the manual kind of effort. They're also doing a lot more of adverse media screening because you need to kind of look at vast data sources and being creating risk report, customer profiles, and all of those. So generative AI is kind of churning that out very quickly. So two very good examples of how there is very tangible benefit of vertical GenAI agents across the compliance mandate as well as customer experience and employee experience.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ronak. So Aaron, what strategies can financial institutions adopt to deploy AI-driven financial crime solutions while ensuring compliance with regulatory frameworks?
So, I mean, a solid first step is establishing a clear data governance structure. You also want to ensure robust transparency for any AI system or agent used. Some of the cloud platforms like Google, AWS have started deploying not just API management frameworks, but also generative AI or AI based frameworks, especially when you're looking at cost, private models versus public models, etc. You want to make sure that you're automating compliance checks, streamlining identity verification. You want to be able to orchestrate transaction monitoring, right? So your controls framework is generally in place. At the end of the day, your models use data, and you want to ensure that the data that you're leveraging is being managed correctly. And then additionally, there's always concerns around ethical AI, also identification of hallucination, implementing human in the loop sort of protocols so that you're not just taking content that's being generated by a model at face value. It needs to go through some sort of verification process. I think it's also important to engage with regulators. You need to demonstrate how your AI models meet the AML KYC needs, showcase explainability, verify that automated processes align with your audit and your oversight requirements. Obviously, have some sort of compliance program and a third level defense program as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Aaron. Ronak, what are your thoughts on this question?
So I think in addition to what Aaron mentioned, a few things, right? One is regulations, right? If I look at global AML laws, be it FATF's risk-based approach or FinCEN's right, BSAML requirements, I think are important, right? Because AI systems, when they start filing a lot of reports, right, be it SAR, CTRs, and others, they need to safeguard customer data, right, and remain compliant. So I would say that is going to be, for me, a core theme. And the second piece is using regulatory collaboration and sandboxing, right? So there are these industry bodies that provide sandboxes for you to test out AI models, which definitely helps because you are now proactively engaging the regulators, getting more clarity in terms of the compliance expectations, and also preventing any regulatory pushbacks when things are further down the development life cycle. So we do believe a combination of that is needed in terms of, in addition to what Aaron mentioned around explainability, transparency, human oversight, governance, and ethics, and all of those pieces are definitely important. But the regulatory collaboration and understanding the global AML rules will definitely be helpful to scale this up rightly, right? Otherwise, you will have significant roadblocks that will slow you down.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And Ipshita, I suspect you have a perspective on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think Aaron and Ronak did a fantastic job of, summarizing really what I think we need to keep in mind. Probably the only thing I would add is, with these AI models, I think regulators in general are always a little bit concerned. So maybe they have cautious optimism when it comes to any sort of financial institution, implementing any of these. And I think model validation is a big component. Just ensuring model risk management, because as Aaron and Ronak said, these agents have access to so much data, whether it's customer data, transaction data, SARs that have been filed and all of that. And, these are very sensitive information. So ensuring that the model is governed properly, that the inputs to the model, the outputs are all in alignment as expected, and just having that documented. Because, let's say, for example, the OCC comes into a bank and says, okay, you have this AI model that's, let's say, doing your transaction monitoring. How do you know for sure that it's actually doing what it's supposed to do and not compromising any of that data? And I think having just, lots of documentation, lots of, just being clear about what the risk appetite is, just having the models validated regularly in sort of alignment with these regulations, I think is definitely very important. And yes, just being proactive, I think, with the regulators themselves to let them know that you're doing this, and this is what you want to implement, and just making them familiar, so that it makes the exams, I think, also just generally easier. And I think the last point in general is that it's also very important for any sort of financial institution to be to keep up with these evolving regulations, because obviously different countries, different regulators will have different standards and expectations of what they want you to adhere to. So I think it's important to keep up with that as well, because regulations keep changing. So keeping up with that is important, I think.
Excellent. Thank you. So, Aaron, what are some of the major challenges in financial crime compliance that agentic AI can address effectively?
So a big pain point is data fragmentation. Institutions often store transactions, customer details, and risk data in separate silos. And agentic AI can unify these data sources and automate retrieval to integrate insights for a fuller risk picture. High false positives also tend to overwhelm investigative teams, which creates a lot of resource intensive work. So by leveraging agentic AI, you can refine detection of algorithms, integrating advanced analytics to clarify whether a transaction is genuinely suspicious or benign. Additionally, really scaling real-time monitoring is also critical. So AI-driven automation can rapidly process millions of transactions and flag emerging threats, which is nearly impossible, right, with manually intensive methods.
Excellent. Thank you, Aaron. Nick, I'd like to hear from everybody on this question, actually. So, Nick, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So I won't touch the monitoring and detection piece, because I know Aaron did a great job explaining that one. But I think another area which Aaron touched on is the manual piece. So I think agents can definitely help address automating compliance workflows or fraud workflows. And I know I mentioned the AML investigation piece before and the onboarding example before. But I mean, I think from FCC workflow standpoint, there's often a lot of repetitive, time-consuming tasks like document verification, reg cross-referencing, data validation, generating report summaries like SARs, I should have mentioned. So all of these different processes boil down to agents can go out and retrieve the data from the various sources that are required, summarize it, and then spit out tangible outputs or generate specific reports, and then plug back into whatever workflow that it's part of, or what other systems that it's part of. So I think my summary is just it's really helpful in automating those workflows.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Thanks, Nick. And Ronak.
Yeah, no, I think we've covered a lot. I would say faster triaging. I think smarter, faster triaging and analysis. I think that's something that we do see in addition to the automation of the repetitive work, pattern recognition that we mentioned. Also augmenting human decision, like AI as a co-pilot in financial crime and compliance, I would say could be helpful, because it can allow investigators to kind of verify an act, right? It becomes like an AI assisted alert. which can then help improve the hit rates. It can improve the tracking speed, specifically in high risk cases. So I would say those are the core ones that I do see here.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes,
Yeah,
Ishita, we'd love to
I,
yeah. Yeah.
I'm not sure I can add too much more. I think, these guys have covered all of it, but maybe just adding on to the manual side of things, when and we see this, right? And, people who are doing alert reviews, and they're doing this day in and day out, and it's just so much effort. It's you're reviewing so much information. You're reviewing the client data, you're reviewing, I don't know, transaction data, KYC data, and it's, you're prone to errors, right? I mean, we're all human beings. We get exhausted after a 8-hour, 10-hour day, and people are still reviewing alerts. And I think it's having something like an agent, as Ronak said, like a co-pilot, summarizing this information for you, so you kind of have very specific targeted areas of risk that you're looking at, instead of looking at like 200 pages. And I'm simplifying it, but if you're looking at 200 pages and you're tired of this, but a co-pilot just comes and says, hey, just look at this is the risk that you have to look at, this is what you need to focus on. That just makes the whole review process faster. It just helps increase efficiency, and probably just also maybe, from a human perspective, team morale, right? People feel like they have something that's making them be more efficient and just better in their work overall. I think it also improves the quality of the work that an individual is doing. So I think it helps not just from a technology standpoint, not just from a risk identification standpoint, but also just from from a morale standpoint. I would think that it can just help make things better and faster.
Interesting. Thank you.
Sure.
Awesome. All right, Nick, let me ask you the next one here. Yes, how do horizontal and vertical GenAI agents differ in their application and effectiveness in financial crime compliance?
Thanks, Mike. So I think the biggest difference, if we define what a horizontal agent is versus a vertical agent, I'll start with that, is horizontal agents can handle wide varieties of tasks across various areas or functions, right? And if we're talking FCC, obviously they can handle multiple workflows. So like from that perspective, they can automate broad tasks like doing document creation or document generation. They can handle data summarization. Broadly speaking, they can handle transaction monitoring or monitoring and alerts. They can retrieve data, right? So like think of that as kind of horizontal, regardless of what the data type is, the data sources are, the alert generation, it can handle all that stuff. Versus vertical agents, which are very specialized, or they're tailored to a specific workflow or a specific area, right? So if it's transaction monitoring, that agent is trained and designed with everything in mind for what transaction monitoring would entail, versus an AML investigator agent, right? So augmenting an agent, an AML investigation process, that agent is trained on all of those steps, all the data sources associated with an AML investigation or with a KYC onboarding or whatever that scenario is. So the biggest difference here is vertical is specialized in a specific workflow versus horizontal, think as a broad stroke tool or solution. And in terms of the effectiveness, right? So the last piece of the question, from a horizontal agent perspective, I think they lack that depth or understanding for the highly specialized tasks, right? So they're effective in overall efficiency and reducing manual workloads, but they're not going to be precise in terms of, let's say they're producing a SAR, right? A vertical agent would be able to produce that SAR, know exactly what data points should be pulled out from data sources, et cetera. Whereas the horizontal agents would more so like generate format in the template, but the content might not be as accurate. So like that's kind of the biggest difference is they both do similar things, but vertical is specialized in that specific topic or workflow.
Thanks, Nick. Aaron, I'd love to get your thoughts on this one as well.
Sure. I mean, Nick gave a great explanation in terms of the basic differences, but I think from an operational standpoint, how organizations leverage those. And there's frameworks out there like Microsoft came up with AutoGen, which is a basic framework for collaborating or coordinating different types of agents together. There's also LangChain, which helps create more of a horizontal, sort of a vertical flow, right, where one thing kind of goes to the next from a process flow. But those automation capabilities, whether they're, you know, frameworks or full, you know, no code, low code solutions that automate the process, it can streamline the handoff between the different agents. So, you know, for instance, you're talking about a SAR, right? Suspicious activity can have it be identified, but then you can leverage the process of getting additional information, routing the case, having appropriate compliance team or specialized agents. You get that human in the loop sort of process involved. So not only is the process you're leveraging, augmenting agents with whether it's broad knowledge or specific knowledge, but then also incorporating the flow so that your actual person, your financial investigator, or somebody trying to requalify a client, they're in the process, so they're reviewing it, and it's taking a lot of that manual effort out. And also, the really finding is that the productivity or the quality of the data that gets out is much higher, right? And that's sort of a you're not only doing it faster and more efficiently, but the quality is actually higher. But it has to be done in sort of the right way, right? If that makes sense. Um, I think additionally, you know, the horizontal agents, even though they have broad capabilities, there's use for them within the organizations versus vertical agents. And I think as time goes on, you're going to get more specific agents that are not only built in terms of the type of knowledge they do, but you train them differently, right? So if you have a model that's specific around fraud or something like that, when you're training the model, you're going to provide back feedback that's in line with the rules and sort of the outputs you need. So you have to have a specialized training of that model to make it more efficient. I hope that
Thank you,
answers.
Aaron. Thanks. Yeah, thank you. Excellent. So go next question to you, Aaron. So how do you envision the future of generative AI and financial crime compliance, particularly with the integration of large language models and AI ML models for enhanced monitoring?
Yeah, I think where we're going, like the future where generative AI, especially when integrated with LLMs and AI machine learning, what we're seeing is we're gonna have a fully automated, proactive approach to FCC, financial crime compliance. These agentic AI frameworks, which coordinate multiple specialized AI agents, I think will ingest real-time data, right, from various sources, and then we're gonna apply advanced analytics to spot anomalies or suspicious trend. This setup really goes far beyond today's siloed systems and rule-based filtering. It empowers compliance teams to shift from reactive monitoring, right, to continuous automated surveillance. I think bringing in the new tools, right, that we're going to see coming out is going to seamlessly connect different processes. We're going to orchestrate better, especially in AI-driven checks at every step. And we're going to ensure every transaction or customer profile is intelligently screened, right? The level of integration that we're seeing is should pave the way for near instant detection and resolution of illicit activities, fundamentally enhancing how institutions stay compliant. The big thing is that as we build more and the hypotheses are proved out more, then leveraging the smarter, like, you know, vertical agents is gonna create more efficient models to actually do the anomalous detection, and then increase the productivity of the outputs, so that we end up with having a more proactive trend based, not trend based, but more you know, predictive, truly predictive models that are aligned to actual activity.
Thanks, Aaron. Ronak, I'd love to hear
And
your thoughts.
Sure, and I would kind of structure this across four key headers, right? If I think about it, one is process, the other is data, the third is technology, and fourth is talent and skills. And if I take it one by one, if you look at from a process perspective, I do believe we will have an opportunity to reimagine the way we do the work. because AI gives us that ability to have 24/7 monitoring, 24/7 real-time AI-led surveillance. It will allow us to look at multiple processes at the same time. So a lot of the hoops that we have created and friction that we have created in the process to have multiple checks and balances and controls, maybe some of those can be done in parallel because of AI. So there will be a lot of changes in the process as a whole is what I see. And some of this we don't even know how it's going to pan out. So it's a lot of evolutionary in the nature is how I think about it. And this is where the data conversation also comes in. We believe you will not, currently we're looking at a lot more structured data, but also unstructured data comes into the play. So the ability to look at unstructured data, also the ability to generate a lot of synthetic data, synthetic frauds, synthetic scenarios will be important, right? Because now you'll be able to do a lot of AI-powered data sharing models, right, which will enhance the compliance while preserving privacy. So you can do federated learning, which hasn't been possible right now, but you will be able to do that to do cross-bank fraud patterns, right? So this is about protecting the industry and not just one institution. And this pooling of industry-wide typologies is something that we always dream about, but actually now it's possible, right? Because if you can have an open source LLM model, why not a open source vertical agent model that serves the industry and not just one bank? It is for the good of the bank and the economy and the customers. So I do see that, and that comes to my technology point, right? So the evolution of technology, I do believe a lot more of AI infusion in the process technologies that we are currently having, but also some of these legacy automation technologies like RPAs that we've been installed base. I think removing some of that will also be important. And last but not the least, but the most important, talent, right? People's work will change, right? So will need different skills, different roles. So think of something like data scientist for compliance or a chief AI fraud detection officer. I don't know, right? Again, some of these roles will have to evolve because now you will need people to check AI's work versus people to check other people's work. And those are going to be sophisticated skills that we need because you will need domain understanding of financial crime and compliance, deep understanding of data science and statistical models, and then understanding of financial crime and compliance and AI applied to it. So this is going to change the talent dynamics of what we have in this market out here. So that's the broadly how I see the data process technology and talent model changing because of the generative AI application out here.
Yeah, I really agree with Ronak on the people concept because as human resources, right, use the tools more, we're going to need more compliance around how to use them. But additionally, the models themselves, right, as we have agents, in many ways are going to become resources, and we have to manage the compliance of those as well.
Excellent, excellent. Ishita, did you have anything you might want to weigh in on here?
Yeah, I mean, I think just on, the continuous monitoring piece of it, I know is, very, very important for all sort of, all financial institutions to be able to do because, that helps to really manage risk more appropriately and I think more frequently. So, based on what Aaron and Ronak mentioned, I think, that's definitely an important factor and it's not something that, a human can do as often as, let's say, an AI agent can. Just like if you look at sort of client file reviews or periodic KYC reviews, even every bank calls it a different term. But those happen for clients based on their risk levels at sort of varying frequencies. And if you don't have the continuous monitoring in place, you won't necessarily know if a risk profile of a client has changed. So having an agent kind of continuously monitoring a client profile based on various behaviors, product usage, transaction usage, and so on and so forth, they can flag up risks a lot more frequently, I think, than than a human being can. And I think that also helps because you don't want a regulator coming in and saying, oh, by the way, have you, do you have this client? We've identified this problem or whatever. You don't want that to come from the regulator. You want to be able to identify that risk yourself and address the client and the accounts appropriately. So I think if GenAI can do that and just help manage risk better, I think it's better for all of us. So that was the only thing I wanted to add.
Actually, thank you. Aaron, what about sort of the flip side of this? Like, how are criminals leveraging generative AI to perpetuate fraud, and what measures can financial institutions take to counteract those tactics that are emerging?
Yeah. So the big thing is on the other side is obviously criminals have access to generative AI to produce sophisticated deepfakes, synthetic identities, highly convincing phishing schemes all at scale, right? And they don't have like the limitations of that's sort of the opposite of compliance. Like, how can we make these not ethical, immoral? We can try anything, and the success for them is not getting caught, and then finding effective methods to to either perpetuate fraud or to automate these processes, right? So that when they do attacks, whether it's a cyber attack, hard to detect, whether they're doing phishing, right, having more convincing, like we always see the the uh, uh, the standard sort of the prince of whatever some country is going to give you money, right? And we're kind of like, well, this seems silly to me. You'll find somebody that falls for it, but it's a lot harder. Whereas now, through these models, they're able to create basically more advanced strategies and tactics and more convincing language, because the tools can generate language pretty well, right? Um, I think financial institutions can fight back though, right? With equally sophisticated AI-driven monitoring solutions, particularly those using agentic AI principles. So having methods to continuously monitor these systems, create detection, get coordinated analysis across multiple steps. And then on top of that, obviously robust staff training and real-time monitoring protocols, which we've mentioned a couple times. Right. So if the criminals are using these tools, again, it's kind of you have detection and you have prevention, right? You're going to have certain tools that can prevent it, but at the end of the day, at some point, they're going to kind of work through. So you want to have detective methods that are able to identify these sort of things and then capture them or move those to, whether it's police or some sort of other investigation unit to have action.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, thank you, Aaron. All right, so that brings us to our last question here, and again, I'd love to hear all voices on this last question before we sign off for the day. But let's start, Nick, with you on this one. How can generative AI enhance the investigation capabilities of financial crime compliance teams, particularly in identifying complex fraud patterns and reducing false positives?
All right. Thanks, Mike. So I guess I'll start with fraud patterns, right? And I think there's several ways that Gen AI and agents can bolster fraud patterns or reducing false positives. But if we start with fraud patterns, right? I think the first piece is advanced anomaly detection. And I know we've mentioned detection before in some of the other questions, but there's different models and different approaches, such as generative adversarial networks, who that can simulate both normal and fraudulent behaviors, right? And this allows for them to detect subtle deviations that might not have been identified with traditional systems or traditional models, right? So by learning from vast amounts of transaction data, these models identify those patterns, both normal and fraudulent. Another piece, which I know Ronick touched on earlier, is unsupervised learning. So unlike the rule-based systems, there's unsupervised learning that can happen to help identify these anomalies in the future, where they don't need predefined risk indicators or parameters to identify that. That all can happen in a very defined set of guardrails, which is obviously going back to governance and controls, but it can still happen, right? And I think that's another area that Gen AI helps with. The last piece I'll mention is around synthetic data generation. So creating synthetic data sets that closely mirror these real world transactions or real world data, or using training models on historical data. I think from a synthetic data lens, that's another key piece that can help identify fraud patterns in very complex environments. I'll save the false positives for the rest of the group. I don't want to answer all the questions, but I'll stop there and take a pause.
Thanks, Nick. Aaron, would love to hear your voice on this.
Sure. I mean, building on the initial perspective, generative AI significantly raises the bar on what's possible in complex fraud detection. And I think especially when you combine it with the agentic AI frameworks, orchestrating multiple specialized agents, we can sift through massive amounts of structured and unstructured data, transaction logs, communication, external databases, and be able to highlight subtle patterns. But I think when you asked, which is investigation capabilities, immediately, we talk about false positives, right? And reducing those. But at the end of the day, an investigator is going to have to be the person that's going to actually conduct the analysis. And one of the biggest things, especially in some of the newer agents, is deep research. We also, when you work with an investigator, they have to research negative news. They have to see what type of clients the customer's been working with. They need to go see what the history of the transactions are. And a lot of that is a lot of manual effort for going out and gathering that information, working through it. So from a end user perspective of the investigation, what I think is that the capabilities of that team, right, in identifying those things, is that the agentic frameworks are going to help that investigator to offload a lot of that manual information, bringing in like, hey, we got this from this news source. This is from this news source. It's summarized. It's completed. We understand like they had this many transactions. This is the banks where it was at. So when you go through that analysis and you tie that in, it's going to greatly increase the quality of the SAR filing. It's going to greatly increase the ability for the person, the investigator, to go, this actor is definitely up to something, right? And have the information and the data to support that, right? And that is one of the biggest challenges, right, the banks have right now, is at the investigation level when all this comes together.
Excellent. Thank you, Aaron. All right, everyone. Want to hear from Veronica?
No, again, happy to. So I think I'm going to take a couple of examples, right, which makes it kind of brings it to life. So one is the typical hub and spoke laundering networks, right? So if you think about it, AI's ability to do the visualization of this fraud, right, this entire network mapping is really powerful. It can start looking at these transaction spokes to identify these hidden hub and spoke laundering networks. And we've seen, right, and again, there are live proof of concepts that we've seen where there have been certain accounts which were trying to do an inter-transfer funds to a central hub. It would have taken a lot of manual effort to get them to the entire network and shut it down, but AI was able to catch these intricate fraud patterns very quickly. So I think that's something which I like. The other piece, the example that I'll take is I think I mentioned the triage and the entire prioritization piece. If you think about it, as humans, if there's an AI which can help me prioritize what are the key things that I need to look at right now, that's really powerful, right? So the ability for AI to rank all these alerts based on several dimensions, be it risk severity, exposure, known connections, and all of the other pieces, it will prioritize the right transactions for us to look at. And that has a lot of value in these situations. And also the ability to act fast. If there is a negative media over a larger, low risk transaction, I need to be able to prioritize that first. And being able to do that is going to be important. And this will significantly improve the fraud detection hit rate. So those are my two examples out here.
Excellent. Thank you. We'll give you the last word on the last question.
Last but not least. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the biggest thing that I really see, and I think everyone has touched upon it, is just the ability of AI to just handle so much data, so much information, whether it's, pictures or just like, KYC stuff or government IDs, and just kind of drawing from that, providing insights. I think those are, which actually help from an investigation standpoint, just kind of simplifying the process overall. I think that, AI can really do a lot of that, and I think more and more institutions need to start adopting it and finding ways to really streamline their processes, because I think that level of benefit will not only make the investigation process easier, but just provide the kind of insights that a human being would not be able to gather. I mean, if you have a client who has an account in multiple countries, for example, if you have an AI agent that can kind of consolidate all of that information and then augment, let's say, a KYC file, for example, without a human being having to do it, and doing multiple reach outs, I think that that also helps to improve the process. So I mean, there's obviously a lot that AI can do, and I think we're probably just getting started, or maybe we have, and just trying to build upon that as much as possible, and hopefully that journey continues for all of us. So thank you.
Perfect. That is an excellent note to wrap up on. Thank you. And let me first of all thank Nick, Aaron, Ronak, and Ivshita. Thank you all for your expertise and your time here today. Really important topic, and I think we really kind of dug into it really nicely. So thanks for that. And everyone in our audience, thank you for being here. We would not want to do it without you. So appreciate your taking your time out of your day to be here. And as I said, we will, anyone that had a question, we will follow up after the program, and your voice will be heard. So thank you for putting those questions in there. And also keep an eye out. We'll be sending a follow-up email the next day or two that'll have a link to a recording of this event and some other information. So please keep an eye out for that. And with that, I will officially wrap it up. Wish everyone a wonderful rest of the day, and I hope you'll join us again here very soon. Thanks so much.